property as well as national forest and state land to the west. And I was driving down the I guess Highway 74. There's a whole bunch of elk there, and they're for the most part staying on the south side of the road. And there's one large bull in the group, and the cows are all bedded there, and of course we're creating traffic jams. And I'm sure you guys have all seen this if you lived up here at times, and you get issues with folks not pulling completely off the road. You get folks that, depending on the topography, getting quite close to these animals, and folks, really don't know, how dangerous these animals can be at certain times of the year, both the cows and the bulls. I kind of had a number of conversations with folks about, them getting too close, and that's what the zoom on your camera is for. Is let's stay back and make sure that we don't get too into these animals' way. And generally, what I tell folks is that if that animal makes any sort of changes in its behavior or notices that you're there, that basically means that you're too close. So if that animal moves slightly away from you, if that animal perks up and looks at you, right, you've now kind of entered that animal's bubble, and you need to start being more cautious or conscientious of your own behavior and how you approach or interact with that animal. In some much more wild areas of the state where you don't have habituated animals like you do here in Evergreen, you may get hundreds of yards, maybe half a mile even, from some of these animals, and they start to flee. So different animals have different tolerance levels of people. And so at this time of the year, and at, in particular like calving season, those animals will adjust their comfort zone, if you will, and they'll tolerate people up to a certain point. And so during the rut, really those bulls are much more focused on something else than you until you get too close, right? In the summertime, they're kind of just feeding and doing their own thing. They don't really have a whole lot of concern, but things change, right? And so you really need to make sure that you keep your distance, and don't be afraid to say something to some of these folks that do get too close. And I mentioned it to a few folks of, hey, now's probably time that you want to get into your car. We get a lot of people that just don't either live up here or they're visiting, and they don't get to know kind of how these animals interact, and really how quick they are, and they don't see things coming necessarily. If you've watched elk, you can kind of see things develop. If you get one bull coming in and you got a smaller bull that's on one side, you can see the dynamics start to play out, and you can see that, okay, this elk's going to come in and try and steal cows, and then this elk's going to try and defend his cows. And that's when they might start running around a lot more. Whereas if you just have one bull and you got his harem sitting there, you're probably a little bit more, it's more of a safer situation to sit there on the side of the road. The situation I saw the other day is when the smaller bull came in, this big bull came up and actually got up on the road and chased this other bull down the highway. And so you can see how the situation changes quite drastically. So that's a pretty common occurrence up here in Evergreen. And, sometimes we'll kind of babysit the elk and babysit the people, but that's a very small portion of my job. And ultimately we just need to focus on just having folks, give animals the space that they really deserve.
I second everything you said. The only thing I want to emphasize that when you are in a situation like this, where you have elk that are extremely tolerant, they can go from 0 to 11 really fast, versus another area where you have that flight initiation distance, which is what you're talking about, where at what distance does an animal spook? And animals that are tolerant tend to not even have a flight initiation distance. They've been around people so long that it really takes that encroachment into their space, and then they're just done. It's not even any subtle cues or anything. So really keeping your distance and respecting wildlife. The other thing I'd like to add is that dogs can really aggravate a situation. And so having your dog on leash, you do not know how your dog will react to elk or any other wildlife. And so saying my dog is under voice control, I find to be a mythology that I don't believe in ever. And have seen a lot of dogs that were under voice control completely just go rogue in the sight of, you name it, a species of wildlife that's completely unsafe for a dog to approach or go into pursuit. So if you want to mitigate risk, have that dog on leash, have that dog nearby so that you're not aggravating these animals when they're already in a stressful situation. And that's the only thing I would add to every great thing you said.
And I ditto everything they said. Some of the issues that we've had around the Evergreen area and some of our mountain parks is even though we consider the elk population that hangs out in this general area our resident elk population, you know, a lot of people think that they're too used to people and they're not going to attack, or they're not going to approach people when people try to get too close to them. And the reality is these are wild creatures, these are wild animals, and whether they're a resident population or a group of animals that hang out in that general area and see people more often, or even dogs more often, we still have to respect those animals. And that's really the message that we try to give to the public. We don't want people to get used to the idea of, well, they're only resident elk here and they are used to us, so it's okay if you get too close. We don't want to give that message. We want these wild animals to be respected all the time, no matter what they're used to. And we just never know how they're going to respond to our presence or presence of dogs. So just keep your distance, everything that Mary and Scott said on educating the public.
So folks, I'm wondering, right now, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
What would you say is the current population of the Evergreen elk herd?
So we manage based on larger geographic areas. So Evergreen is a portion of a much larger, what we call our DAU. So that incorporates pretty much all of the conifer south down to the North Fork of the South Platte River. I-70 is more or less the boundary, and then it goes west up towards Berthoud Pass, and then it's a continental divide. And that goes down to, Grinnell Pass, and then it kind of splits over, kind of in a Hall Valley, if you know where that's at, and then over towards Bailey. And so in that geographic area, we've got about 2,000 to 2,500 elk in that area. And so obviously we're not necessarily counting all the elk to get to that point. We use a number of different models to get to that point, but we do winter surveys. And so every winter we'll do either aerial classifications by a helicopter, or we will do ground counts, and we'll count those elk, and based on our siteability models. And then we've also used and kind of corroborated some of this data with marked animals that we've had. And I'm sure you guys have seen some of the marked animals that we've got radio collars around their necks. But that can help us with population estimates there. These animals do migrate. And so, some of the animals in Evergreen do migrate, and some of them don't. And so we've actually seen pretty significant movements with a lot of our animals, and that makes it much more difficult for our population estimates, because sometimes they cross these boundaries from one herd to the next. And depending on the time of year you're counting, you might be counting animals that originated from outside of that DAU.
Thanks.
Yes, at the back.
Hi, I'm relatively new and in the area. I moved in June. And I live just west of the trailhead at Elk Meadow, up off the Stagecoach. And, I have two questions, are really just kind of about going outside, like at night. So, when I exit the house to go outside, if I go to take something, go to the park for some reason, it's kind of like pitch dark outside and a blind spot. Do I need to do anything when I go outside to kind of let any, because if I can't see what I can't see, I don't know if there might be something out there that occur. Do I need to worry about that, or is there something I should be doing when I go outside and let them know I'm coming?
No dumb questions. There is no such thing.
It's a great question and probably one that haunts you every time you open the door. And I would say that a lot of folks will get sort of an automatic light situation, a motion sensing light situation. So if there is something out there, it already triggered the light for you. Another thing that some people do that are concerned is put a headlamp on so you can kind of see where you're going. You can be noisy as you exit, just so that you're not surprising anything. So and certainly don't wear like a baloney necklace or something like that when exiting the house at night, because that could create a stir. So I'm not making light, I'm just trying to make it fun. So, but yeah, I would say that motion sensing light, that gives people a certain level of comfort that if it's already on, then you know something's out there. And I'd be more concerned about two-leggeds, frankly, than four-leggeds. To be honest, it's just incredibly unlucky if you surprise a mountain lion at your front door. But that's my thought. Anybody want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I have a cabin in Fairplay, and it's always dark when I exit the house at night. It's just kind of scary too. But the first thing I do is turn my porch light on. And I actually pound on my door. I just kind of knock on it because I have startled a bear before. And I don't want that to happen again. So I do make noise when I exit at night. But maybe other people have other ideas on what they do.
Now, follow-up question, it's kind of related to that. So when I moved here, I have a couple dogs, right? And the dogs are on kind of like a biological clock where they do go out at a certain time. And one of them is a puppy. So I take them out at night. There's a side yard that's well lit. So I go out. So if I go out with these dogs at night, it's well lit right next to the house. Am I in danger?
Well, first of all, you're doing the right thing. You need to be directly supervising those dogs when you're taking them out at night. And so I'm really happy to hear that you're out there with the dogs rather than supervising from the kitchen window. And so I would say it's lit, you're out there with them, maybe making a titch of noise. But again, if it's the middle of the night, your neighbors might not appreciate that too much. So just being aware, situationally aware, and the dogs will probably alert before you do. So watching their behavior very carefully could also tip you off that there might be something in the area and you maybe need to come in and give it a moment to get away. That's my thought.
So the most likely, conflict that may arise is if you let your dogs out. Sometimes they'll chase deer. We have that happen quite frequently. But then also mountain lions that may want to prey upon your dog. For the latter example, probably the best way to try and mitigate some of that is doing what Marianne just mentioned, but also doing some kind of mitigation around your house and trimming out some of the thicker brush, trimming out some of the trees, trying to eliminate some of those hiding places. Animals do sort of a cost benefit analysis in their mind of, hey, is it going to be worth attacking this dog? And if they've got to stalk in from a long distance away because there's no brush to get close, or if it's well lit and the dog's got an advantage because he can see, those are things that are going to make that cat less likely to attack. So those are a few things that you can do. We also get a lot of livestock here in Conifer and Evergreen, whether it be goats or sheep or horses, stuff like that. Electric fence is one of the tools that we encourage because that really deters things like bears and mountain lions as well.
Yes.
I have a question to further that point. I was told that like a mountain lion will learn our routine of letting the dogs out at night and start to watch for that potential. Is that true, or is that just an old wives' tale or something like that?
I mean, they certainly can. You know, some animals like motion detecting lights, you know. For instance, when we have situations where we have depredation, so we have bears or mountain lions that have ate livestock, maybe you've got an alpaca or a group of alpacas that you keep outside all the time and it's at nighttime, okay? We will offer suggestions to that landowner on, hey, this is a way that you might be able to reduce conflict. Electric fence is a huge one. Lighting can be key, because if that is turning on when that animal's present, that may be enough to startle that animal. Each animal's got its own kind of comfort level, I guess. Some animals are super comfortable around people, and others are much more shy. But they can get habituated to that. And so things like an AM radio playing in and around your barn can be a great tool. And the cat might think that something is there, and a person might be there, and you can hear the talking, and then moving that, you know. So one day it's over here, the next day it's behind the tree. And so kind of mixing it up, always changing things, helps keep those animals from really figuring things out. So that's my suggestion.
I'll also add that I'll go to coyotes, because I think coyotes do figure out routines. And I've had a situation where I walk my dog and I see the same coyote at the same time in the dark in the morning. And then I make a decision to change my behavior, that I don't want to be in that hinky situation. So I'm going to change what time I walk my dog, and I'm going to change my route until we get through breeding season, because this is usually associated with breeding season, because that's when they key in on domestic dogs. So you may need to vary. If you turn light on and you spook a mountain lion 2 nights in a row with this timeout for the dogs, I would make an adjustment to that timeout, because it may be figuring out your schedule, and you definitely want to mix things up.
And what's the breeding season?
For which species?
What you had mentioned coyotes.
Oh, so with coyotes, we see conflict sort of begin to increase as we move out of daylight saving time. And that conflict stays pretty high through April. And then it comes down a little bit, and then it spikes again as the coyotes disperse in September. And so that's based on aggregate information from the Denver metro area that we did as part of our research study. So, and again, for dogs, coyotes' interest in dogs is not food, it's competition. And so that's why that's affiliated with the breeding season.
What about fox? Is it similar? Similar to fox? Yeah. We have a bunch of neighborhoods, sort of like social media groups, and fox were out in force this summer. There were a lot of fox, a lot of different kinds of fox. So they have a similar breeding pattern. There's a question here from someone in the group. How many people are injured by elk or wildlife in Evergreen annually? Anybody have any? It's the other way around.
So I don't have exact numbers, but very few, really. I would say that there are by far more animals that injure, deer and elk and moose that injure people in Colorado statewide than bears and mountain lions do. So you are far more likely to be injured by a deer or elk or a moose than you will be a mountain lion or bear. Just my own personal experience when I was working up in Grand Lake, I dealt with probably, I don't know, 8 or 10, pretty serious incidents with moose. I had one lady that was put into a coma. I had another one with a broken pelvis. The mayor of Grand Lake was actually killed by a moose. And so moose are very, very dangerous. Same thing with elk and deer. Deer have a bit more of a flight response, but when you get populations in particular that are being fed, I've had bucks that have gored people or gored and killed pets. We had an individual on the golf course last year here in Evergreen that was gored by a bull. And he was actually quite fortunate that he didn't lose his life based on his injuries. And so those are fairly common. I wouldn't say common, but they're far more prevalent than bear and mountain lion attacks. I've dealt with one mountain lion attack in my career, and that was 2 years ago with a kid over in Bailey. And that was a quite serious attack. And without his dad coming in and saving him, he most certainly would have been dead. The bear incidences that I've dealt with 2 of them where a person has been physically contacted. One, again, was over in Bailey just a couple of weeks after this mountain lion attack. And that was a situation where the bear was in a house, and the sow was trying to protect the cubs, and essentially the person kind of was in the way as the bear was trying to escape. The other incident I dealt with was up out of Winter Park, and it was a kid that was sleeping outside under the stars in an area where we have a lot of pretty serious trash issues and a lot of squatters and homeless folks that use these valleys, and the sanitation is very poor. And the bears kind of go up and down, and really the bear kind of grabbed this kid by the head, barely even left a scratch on his forehead. That was the extent of his injury. And I think the bear kind of was just, snorting through the trash and garbage and saw his sleeping bag. And, I think they probably both startled each other. And so my experience has been, bears and lions are kind of the least of your concern.
Yes.
Speaking of social media earlier, I was browsing on Nextdoor. There's an acquisition that the golf course, the restaurant there, didn't have a bear-proof dumpster. So this may be directed at Vicki. Is that acquisition fair, or is it?
It's like Keys on the Green. The Keys on the Green. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting that you bring that up. Just this morning, I spoke to our golf course superintendent about that issue, and they actually just recently got a bear-proof dumpster. Hallelujah. So there have been issues there. The bears have been getting into those dumpsters around the restaurant, and a little bit of nudging forced them to do that. So let's move forward, and I'm hoping that that will help. But bears that find a food source will potentially be coming back until that food source is not available anymore. So we're keeping our fingers crossed. Yes.
So relating to his remark, there are dumpsters around town that we have noticed are overflowing. I don't want to name the restaurants.
Oh, I will.
But report them. We need to report them too, because the bears, all they had to do is walk over and eat.
Well, I don't know
And
if
then they walk
I
up
won't
into our neighborhood.
speak out of turn. Scott might be able to answer this better, but there's no ordinance in Evergreen that requires restaurants or anybody to have bear-proof dumpsters. It's definitely something that we encourage. I can only speak on behalf of our mountain park properties, and trying to encourage as many of our mountain properties to get bear-proof dumpsters. But yeah, I don't know that who they would go to, but other than the restaurant owners themselves, and encourage them to get some bear-proof dumpsters.
So I guess I'll address some of the trash issues. Colorado Parks and Wildlife doesn't have any sort of mandate saying that you have to have a bear-proof trash can. There are a few places in the state that do have trash ordinances. I believe Boulder has one, and I believe Durango has one. Both of those are incorporated towns, and so they've got a police force that helps enforce that. Conifer and Evergreen obviously do not have that, and it really kind of creates a challenging situation for us, because you know, we have worked with trash companies. We've worked with some of the community, and, you know, it really only takes one person in that area to kind of cause significant problems for an entire community. And you know, not everybody in the community is going to be 100% with their trash can. And you know, you've probably driven around and you see a lot of the bear-proof or bear-resistant trash cans around. And sometimes you'll see that they either the bears got into them or they didn't latch correctly, something like that. So that's part of the situation that we're dealing with. When it comes to, you know, enforcement of trash issues, I would say that, you know, you can certainly call Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and we'll try and address that situation with some of the restaurants, some of the homeowners. As far as any sort of law enforcement action, it's pretty difficult, and it's very time intensive because I've got to document a known problem. So physically, you know, have evidence that a bear has gotten into this particular trash can. And then I've got to talk with that person. I've got to educate them, and I've actually got to warn them. And they basically have to, at that point, if they fail to make remedial action, so fail to do certain things, that's the only point in which we can issue citations. And so it involves a minimum of 2 contacts with that person. And then we also have to kind of put ourselves in the shoe of that person. You know, what is that person's ability to actually take control of their garbage? You know, I think that was one of the biggest challenges with Boulder and Durango, is dealing with lower income folks that can't afford a bear-proof trash can, or they can't afford to beef up their tough shed that they can put, or they can't build a physical enclosure because they may have some physical limitation to do so. So there's a lot of different factors that we end up dealing with when we're dealing or when we get these types of calls. But we would much rather deal with the situation early on than one much later on. So we also get calls about people that start having bears that are breaking into their house or into their cars. And we learn that, hey, this is not the first time. We're not being called on the first time. This is actually the 9th time that the bear has gotten into their house or one of the other neighbors' houses. And at that point, it's really too late for that bear. Bears are incredibly smart. They're going to learn how to get into trash. They're going to learn how to open things and figure out where those food sources are at. And so, you know, trying to get on the situation ahead of time really is critical, but a lot of folks don't. You know, they kind of think it's cute that the bear got into their trash or the bear got into their bird feed, and oh, it's kind of a no big deal issue. And most of the time it is, right? A lot of those bears never escalate to the point that it's starting to break in the house, but it's, you know, it's kind of the joke of, you know, it's the gateway drug for all bears that are breaking the house. They started by getting into trash. And so it's an important topic to discuss. Unfortunately, there's not a great solution for you, and it's, you know, we're certainly open to suggestions, but it's a far more complicated issue than just creating a trash ordinance.
Thank you, Scott. How many people have had a bear interaction where a bear's gotten into your trash or into your bird feeder? Yeah.
How about a neighbor?
Or a neighbor, yeah, or a neighbor. Okay, so pretty much almost everybody. So how many of you keep a bird feeder up during the summer? Okay. Yeah, but you take them in at night. Okay, because a bear can smell a bird seed from how far? Anybody know? 5 miles. So it's that cost benefit analysis that Scott was mentioning earlier. Is it worth it to walk there for the bird feeder? Sometimes it is. And so these are kinds of the things for us just to be aware about, like, what is it that we're doing that's either drawing the wildlife to us or that's keeping them sort of away from us. Because I think the other thing that you mentioned, Scott, that I think is so important is that when we anthropomorphize wildlife and we think it's cute and we call the bull elk who's in the rut, who has a 13-foot rack span, we call him a big boy. You know, when we start to do this, we take the wildlife out of being wild and we make them Disney. And that's when you see, you know, people with their smartphones walking onto the fairway with, you know, 5 bull elk in full rut. So we use at WildAware, if you can't cover a full bull elk with your thumb, you are too close. And that's just a good rule of thumb. But if you can't literally cover that entire animal with your thumb, you are too close. And you'd be amazed how far away they have to be in order to be covered by your thumb. Mary, you had a question?
I have a follow-up there.
Please.
Besides being whether people think it's cute or funny, or it's annoying, it makes a huge mess. Can you speak to the danger of getting into trash for bears?
Mm-hmm.
So as far as like their physical health, that type of thing,
Yeah.
I personally haven't seen a whole lot of issues with that. I mean, they're if they could eat it, I mean, they seem to eat about anything, and I've not really seen any mortality associated with that. Deer and elk are a whole different story. If they're eating artificial foods, I've seen them die quite frequently. We can talk about that later, but bears, I mean, they could eat the entire trash can and probably be fine. Yeah, I've not seen that, and so.
Yes.
What about putting ammonia in your trash can? I heard that's a good bear insurance.
Sure, just cleaning your trash can, you know, so hosing it out from time to time and you know, spraying it with some sort of household cleaner or bleach or something like that will kind of remove some of those smells. The ammonia will kind of cover over some of those smells. And again, it's how, you know, does that bear really want that badly, or can it just go down the road and find something else? You know, you got to make your house as unpleasant to be there as possible. And bear problems, frankly, are very easy to solve. If you remove the attractant, you remove the bears. Bears can't afford to stay in a place where they're not getting food. They can't afford it. And so they're going to go somewhere else. And so, you know, removing the bird feed, removing any sort of dog food, if you feed your dog on the porch, securing garbage cans, barbecue grills, they might not get a reward, but they certainly get that smell. Cleaning out your car and keeping windows on lower levels closed so that you don't get smells coming out of your house as easily, and inviting bears in. Things like that are kind of some of the practical solutions that you can use to reduce conflict.
Ammonia also works well. Can you hear me okay? I don't know if it
Went off. Ammonia also works well for other wildlife too, like raccoons and skunks and some of those other critters that get into trash cans and dumpsters. You can use ammonia soaked rags around areas like a shed, for example, where you're getting those types of critters burrowing under. So it's a pretty good deterrent.
Yes, at the back.
I was running the other day on the Stagecoach, and it was like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and a woman pulled over to get in the car, a stranger. I had to get in the car because I was full of charge, and the man just like basically ran back into his house, and I was running around this corner, like, so I wouldn't have known that I was about to come up on it. So my question is, like in situations like that, let's say I didn't, some good Samaritan didn't give me the heads up, and I just was running by myself and came up on something. Like, what am I supposed to do? Is there something I should be carrying with me to kind of, as last resort, freaking out, making it away, or some kind of airborne or something.
So it varies by species, but in the case of an elk or a deer or a moose, if they start to sort of, I've been running and I've had a female elk sort of jog up next to me, which was about the creepiest thing you can imagine. And what you want to do is get something between you and that elk. So if you can get a car or a rock or a tree. So instead of letting it run parallel to you or run at you, if you can sort of find something to put between you and that animal, I think in the case of an ungulate, an elk or a moose or deer, that's the safest thing to do. Bears, same thing. If you can get something between you and the bear, but also with bears or coyotes or mountain lions, you can use hazing, which is not the same as harassment. So hazing is this, it's a body stance, it's an attitude. It's basically letting that animal know you are not prey, you stand your ground, you put your arms up over your head and you yell, and maybe even take a step or two in that direction to sort of come at it. And so it varies by animal what you need to be doing. The problem with people carrying something is if it's not holstered, it's going to be really hard for you to sort of fumble around and get to it. And if you haven't tried using it, we've had people deploy it on their own face, on their friend, on, you know, just disastrous outcomes if you haven't practiced. So if you're carrying bear spray, you can get an inert bear spray, you can practice with it. You need to understand how it works and how it deploys. And you need to holster it because the bear's not going to wait while you dig it out of your fanny pack or your backpack or whatever. So those are just some tips that it varies by wildlife, but just situational awareness is huge. So not wearing earbuds, kind of being able to hear what's going on around you, listening to your spidey sense. If you feel like you're getting followed, you might be getting followed. So kind of take a look behind you and just see what's going on around you. That would be my thoughts.
Excellent. Does that answer your question? Is it helpful? Good. Yes.
Sorry, I guess, sort of similar to that is, like walking on a road or a path and suddenly there's a herd of elk in front of you. I so far have always just turned around, but is it ever okay to like keep going on the path, even if you're not like right on the path and you're next to it? Or should I just turn around?
I think you want to pay really close attention to body language. And if they're right on the path, I would not just go right past them. I think again, especially with tolerant elk like you have here, very used to people, they can go from that 0 to 11 really fast. And so I walk during my lunch break at the Jeffco campus. And when the elk are on campus and they're right on the bike path, I just go the other way because I just don't really want to start a fight. I think that would be embarrassing for me particularly. So, so I think if you have the opportunity, but I wouldn't necessarily just turn your back to them. I would kind of keep an eye and kind of back away rather than turning your back, just so you can keep an eye on the situation. But it's an excellent question. When you can, give them space. Don't just plow right through it. I've seen people do it while they're jogging and I think, oh my goodness, what did you just do? And it's so lucky you got away with it because I wouldn't tolerate that if I were an elk. So, yeah.
You see it often at the lake, yeah, especially in calving season. There's a question here. Do only male deer have antlers? If I have 2 on my property at this time of year, are they dangerous?
So deer, elk, and moose, the males are the only ones with antlers, with very few rare exceptions. Occasionally you'll get a doe with antlers or something, but if you hear of that, it usually makes the news. If a hunter, shoots a doe or shoots a buck thinking it was, and it has the wrong parts, but very seldom. So if it's got antlers, it's a buck or a bull. So elk, we call them bulls. Moose, we call them bulls, and deer, we call them bucks. As far as danger level, right? Any wildlife could potentially be dangerous at any time of the year. And again, the rule of thumb, like was discussed earlier, is important to follow. And then just making sure that you give that animal space. If that animal starts changing its behavior because of your presence, it means that you're too close. And so that you just either need to back up or just give that animal more space. And, as long as you're not too close, right, that animal is going to give you cues that, maybe that it's not liking what you're doing. You know, it may pin its ears back. If any of you have horses, you've probably seen them pin their ears back. That's a clue. They may vocalize, they may snort at you or bark. And, you know, they may, start to kind of square up their body towards you. Those are all good clues that you need to kind of give them more space.
Christine, question.
Yes.
There's a mountain lion that's in my neighborhood. It's been there past few weeks. I'm wondering what sort of behavior by those would dictate a call to CPW. I mean, I know some neighbors have called just the fact that they've seen the mountain lion, but I mean, if it's just in the neighborhood, I mean, I personally don't care. I mean, that's what I moved up here for, but what sort of actions by the mountain lion would dictate a call to you guys?
So the calls that we get a lot of sightings, and largely we don't do anything about those. We also get calls where a mountain lion's killed something in somebody's yard. And so maybe that mountain lion has drug a deer up underneath their deck or their trampoline. And so that can potentially cause some sort of human interaction because that mountain lion at that point has invested a lot of energy into killing that animal. And it's not going to give that up easily. And so it may be hanging around and be much more difficult to get that animal to flee. And it may, kind of want to defend its territory. I've never personally seen an incident where a mountain lion has attacked somebody that's gotten too close to one of its kills. But it certainly can be unnerving when a mountain lion is sitting there and won't go, and you may be pretty close to it. And they're really good at hiding, and so you don't often see them until you're right on them. So that's a common call that we get. And in that situation, we really leave it up to the landowner to do whatever they feel is necessary, right? Our job is not to come out and remove dead animals that die on your property. Animals die all the time from natural and unnatural causes. But in a situation that there could potentially be a human health and safety issue, we'll come out and talk with that landowner. In the instance I mentioned, if we got a deer that's dead under a kid's trampoline, that's going to be a deer that we're going to haul out of there. And at that point, the mountain lion, he may hang out for a while until he realizes that carcass is gone, and he's going to move on and go hunt something else. Right? A full mountain lion is better than a hungry mountain lion. And so if that landowner is comfortable leaving that carcass there, that'd be our preference. But that's completely up to the landowner and their comfort level. In particular, if they've got a larger property or larger acreage or spaced a little bit further from the neighbors, that's a perfectly acceptable situation. There's no need to call necessarily. It might be something that might be worth mentioning to your neighbors of, hey, there's a mountain lion kill in my backyard. You may want to just be a little bit more cautious in this situation. But again, a full mountain lion is much less aggressive or willing to take risks in that situation. And then the final call that we usually get is depredation. So livestock, most of the time it's sheep or goats or sometimes chickens too. And those are certainly situations that we'll address and kind of help that landowner try and mitigate that problem.
Jeffco Open Space, we have human wildlife interactions reporting form. And we actually really want to know when you see wildlife in our parks, please get on that form and submit. And we have different levels. If you just saw the animal and nothing happened, you can just put sighting. If it was a close encounter, maybe you came around the corner and there were all the elk. You can classify your interaction and we monitor those. And if you've ever seen out in our parks, you might see a sign that says moose activity, and it gives you some advice if you see a moose or how to mitigate negative moose conflict. And we monitor those reports, and that's how we decide where we put those signs out and we'll maybe even do a ranger station there to educate people at the trailhead. So we strongly encourage reporting of wildlife interactions. But if you have a dangerous interaction where an animal touches you, bites you, scratches you, you absolutely need to be contacting Colorado Parks and Wildlife and reporting that interaction, because that's a dangerous interaction.
Thank you. Yeah. John, you had a question.
Yeah, a friend of mine had a bear break into his house and just push open some French doors and got into, I guess, a pantry in the kitchen. He told me that he contacted, and I think he said the wildlife officer was up here and they set a trap. And then he said the next night, I think the bear came and broke into their camper. He said, I didn't even think, we had like some dried food in the camper, like mac and cheese, which surprised me. He's like, well, I guess that kind of makes sense. I just had a question about your procedure. Do you set traps when these things are reported, when these kind of break-ins are reported? Is it your intent to trap the bear or what? I thought that's surprising.
Yeah, so we've got a variety of different tools. Our first tool is education. And so we will do site visits at people's houses. We'll look over their property, and they may not be aware of some of the attractants that they have at their property. And so that might be a simple solution to mitigate a problem. Maybe they don't know that they need to secure the trash the way they do. Or, you know, you see people with like a bungee cord over their trash can and they think that's sufficient. Well, it's clearly not for a very strong bear. So education's first. We've got some other tools that we work with. We do have these tools called a pepper barrel. It's basically a big drum, and inside of the drum, we've got a mechanism with a pepper spray can in there, and we bait these. And essentially the bear will pull on the bait and it'll spray the bear in the face with pepper spray. And so we use these as tools to try and use negative conditioning and kind of instill a little bit of pain to that animal, so it starts associating a property with a negative experience rather than a positive one of getting food. And so that's a tool that we deploy quite frequently. This is a situation where the landowner's obviously willing to work with us on the situation. Maybe we've got a shed that has been broken into several times. Maybe the third or fourth time it's broken into, they call us, hey, what do I do about my shed that's being broken into? Maybe we'll deploy a pepper barrel in that situation after we beefed up that shed. So, right, we've made the changes to that shed. We set that pepper barrel out, and hopefully that bear will get hit with that pepper spray and not want to come back to that location. If I happen to see a bear, I'll shoot it with my paintball gun. And so that can be another situation where you give that bear a little bit of pain. It starts associating people with a negative experience, and maybe it's going to go off and do some other thing. When we trap animals, that's kind of a last ditch resort. My district is Conifer. When Vicki was a wildlife officer, she was down in Westminster. And so our habitats between Conifer and Westminster are quite different. And so up in Conifer and Evergreen, if I'm going to set a trap, it is a last ditch effort. And the vast majority of the time that animal is going to be, if it's trapped, it's going to be euthanized. And I'll explain exactly why that is here in a second. Now, if Vicki's got an issue, maybe she's got a bear that's down in Westminster, and that may be a situation where that bear is just in bad habitat. And so that will be a situation where we may trap that bear and relocate it. We've done a lot of studies, and there's been plenty of studies all across the West about relocating bears and the effectiveness of doing that. And certain individuals, in particular younger females, you're going to have more success in relocating. An older boar, you're going to have very low success. And we've relocated bears hundreds of miles across the state, and many of them come right back to the same location that they were captured from. A lot of them die on the way. They get hit by cars, they get killed by other animals or bears, other bears. And so relocation really is not a great solution. People always suggest, well, why don't you just go put them back up in the woods where they belong? Well, the best bear habitat is where people live, because it's open, it's lower elevation, it's a lot of times where the shrubs and the berries and stuff grow. The high elevation stuff, like the wilderness areas, is actually pretty poor bear habitat overall. And it's quite difficult to get a bear into one of these really remote areas like that because, right, I've got a trap that I've got to drive with my vehicle. And so I'm somewhat limited on the locations that I can move an animal to. And so why do we euthanize some of these animals? And again, it comes back to the learned behavior that these bears develop. And so what may start out with an innocent experience where a bear gets into a trash can, the next time it comes to that house, somebody's been cooking some pie in their house, it smells nice, and they leave a screen open in one of the windows, and now that bear pulls the screen off. Somebody might be inside, scares the bear off, and it goes on its way. So we don't get that call, right? So that may progress, and next thing you know, we have a bear that kind of goes through a window. Nobody was home at that point. Now it's learned, hey, I can get into this open window on a first floor, and now it's kind of starting to figure out that this big wooden box actually is a source of food. From there, it may escalate further, like the situation where you said where they pushed open the French doors. Lever handles on doors are kind of a big no-no in bear country because they figure out those real easily. And so the first time, a lot of people, crime is not that big of an issue up here, so people keep their doors unlocked, and that bear pushes that door open, and now it starts to associate that house with the reward, and that behavior continues to escalate. And now it's not only doing this at your house, but it's doing this at everybody else's house. And then I get the call later on of hey, this has really escalated beyond our ability to control this. Okay, well, what's happened? Well, it's gotten into my house 3 times, and I think about 12 other houses in the same subdivision. And at that point, we don't really have a choice but to trap this because it is such a human risk or a human safety issue. I would say most of the bear attacks that we've had across the state have been bears that have been inside homes, and a person is in the way of their exit. And so, trust me, it's the least favorite part of my job is having to put down a bear. And we do our best to utilize the meat. We donate those out to the community, to folks that would utilize that. And it's not what we want to do, but it's kind of our last ditch effort because, we either didn't get the calls or other tools that we've tried haven't worked. And so that's kind of where we are at with bears. We do have a number of bears that have ear tags in them. And you guys have probably seen some of those. Those may originate from a variety of different sources. The green ear tag ones are for the northwest or northeast region of the state. And I would say most of our green ear tag bears are bears that have wandered down into Denver and other suburbs and have been relocated out. There was actually a bear that was hit on the Bellevue and Kipling the other day that had some ear tags in it. And that bear was actually trapped and relocated. It was killing livestock in Conifer in 2015, and that bear was relocated to Grizzly Gulch over by Grays and Torreys in 2015, and then it ended up wandering all the way down to Littleton and Morrison area where it was hit on the highway or on Kipling just a couple of days ago. And so they, that was what I would say a pretty successful relocation. It managed to live for 6 years before, it ultimately got hit by a car. But we also have white ear tag bears, and those are bears that if we have like orphan cubs, we will actually make dens in the winter and put these orphan bear cubs in dens where it kind of gives them a second chance of making it, because otherwise without their mother's care in the summertime or fall, that cub would certainly die. Why do we have orphan cubs, you may ask? Unfortunately, we have some folks that will sometimes shoot bears here in communities. More commonly, it's associated with roadkills. So the sow will get hit by the car, and the cubs either did or didn't get hit, depending on where they're at. And that's kind of that situation.
You had a question up there in the back?
Yeah,
and then
real quick, can you talk about the territory of both bear and mountain lion? Like, gentleman down here had a sighting in a specific neighborhood. Does that indicate, like, do they keep a certain territory where there won't be other populations in that same area? Or are there possibly multiple bears, multiple lions in the same part?
So all population densities, whether it's a bear, or lion, or deer, or elk, is really driven by the food availability of other resources. We notice that in the summertime when when mountain lions prey, the deer start migrating and utilizing all the alpine habitat as well as some of this lower elevation country. Those mountain lions have to expand their terrain or their range as well. And so it really is dependent on the food source. And so in the wintertime, we get a lot more sightings because their prey, the deer and elk, their prey or their winter range shrinks into a smaller area. And thus the mountain lions start using the more concentrated area. Same thing happens with the bears. You know, if we get a really good acorn crop in certain areas of Jeffco, those bears will seek out those acorns, and you get really high densities of bears in those areas. If we have a crop failure and we don't have acorns or berries or whatever it is, we will usually see more conflict. And so, you know, trash cans and other human food sources is where those bears will be at. But we've got really high densities of mountain lions all along the Front Range. Probably some of the highest in the Western United States. So probably within a mile of here, there's a mountain lion, guaranteed. You know, we have plenty of lions, and don't just assume that just because you see one mountain lion here that there's not others around. Because when we dealt with the kid that was attacked over in Bailey, we learned that there was about 8 mountain lions within a mile or two of that location. So can be pretty high densities.
Yes, in the back.
I have a question about my grill.
Your grill? Did you say your grill?
Well, I have a grill on a second story deck. And I mean, like, you know, I'm obviously not eating food out at night, but is the residue from whatever I was cooking on that grill, or hey, you know, there's probably not anything edible on there, or done it, something I need to worry about, and climbing up on that second story deck.
Yes.
Sure.
Bears can climb trees, so they can climb your deck. And that grill is even more appealing than birdseed. So tidying up, sanitation is huge. After the use, make sure there's no drippings, really do a good job cleaning things up. Obviously, you can't get all the smell off a grill, but it's that whole risk reward thing. If it's been tidied up and the smell, you kind of spray it down with some cleaners, you're going to mask that smell a little bit better. But you could also get raccoons. You could get a lot of other things climbing up onto that second story deck. So just because it's on the second story doesn't mean it's out of reach.
Right.
Yes, down here.
Is it a bad idea then to use the ventilator stove that pumps that smell right out into outside? Is that true?
I think you still want to vent your stove. Don't stop venting your stove. It's really, it's, if a grill is sitting there all night with drippings underneath it and everyone's quiet and the neighborhood's quiet and nobody's out there, if I were a bear, I would be totally into that. But the stuff coming out as you're cooking, that dissipates and that doesn't stay. So it's a very different scenario than a grill that's just sort of camped there smelling wonderful.
Good question, though.
But you definitely don't want to fill your house with smells. Let's just continue to vent your grill or your stove.
Along the lines of the pepper barrels, I've heard of people filling like balloons or rigging their trash cans to spray ammonia out of theirs and it's injuring the bear or making them go blind. Can you maybe talk a little bit about proper way to use ammonia, or would you suggest what they're doing?
So I'm going to channel our integrated species management person and say you really don't want to do off-label uses of anything. So if you're gonna booby trap a trash can with ammonia, you could do that to yourself. I mean, what if your spouse goes out and opens the trash can? It's a face full of ammonia. So I actually discourage people from doing off-label uses for things. I mean, you can use the ammonia to clean your trash can and practice really good sound sanitation so you don't have smells. But as far as off-label uses, booby trapping, I would get the actual, do they sell pepper barrels or is that something you guys just do?
No. The pepper barrels we have are ones that we kind of invented up.
Yeah.
But if you are going to use ammonia, anything more than an ammonia soaked rag in or around a trash can is excessive. People have kind of stated, I put peanut butter on an ammonia soaked balloon and that can cause all kinds of pretty significant issues for the bear. I mean, can you imagine getting that poison in your eyes? I mean, that could lead to a lot more worse situations for that. And then also, we get pretty much every bear that we end up skinning out has buckshot or birdshot in it. So people shoot bears with birdshot thinking, well, I'm just gonna kind of haze them away, but that can create more issues again. You may injure a bear, and now that injured bear may start taking additional risks because it's not gonna be able to function quite as well as it would be if it was healthy. And so things like pepper spray are really good tools, and paintball guns, the air horns and pots and pans, turning on your car alarm. Those are good ways to kind of scare that bear away.
Another really handy passive tool is the Mylar balloon bouquet. Those are super creepy to most wildlife and rather inexpensive, and you can just move it around. So because the way those balloons move, it's dark, that animal doesn't know what that is, and that can be super creepy and surprise something and kind of repel it in a very passive way. And nobody gets ammonia in the face. It's just a Mylar balloon.
You had a question?
I just wanted to add, just that this is, you were talking earlier, Scott, about the bear that was hit down in Bellevue and Kipling. I used to live down there, and of course that's not obviously a good bear habitat, but it reminded me of the fact that of how wild we're about at start, and that was based on the concern about roads, and then of course we've expanded to bears and other things as well. But the fact is that, like, on our road, when this bear is repeatedly coming back to my neighbor's trash can after the one time it wasn't locked properly, so now it's the danger of the bear continuing to come back. So now, and what could happen to the bear in the long run if it ends up having to be trapped. But the other side of it too, that trash can is right on the edge of the road, and and I'm always thinking, so now he's not. 2 nights ago, he knocked the trash can into the road. So now we also have the issue of road ecology, of what is happening to animals that are in the road and shouldn't be, because that trash can is right there, literally like on the edge of the road or not in the road. So I just wanted to have that as well.
Who has issues with bear interacting with trash cans? I'm hearing that a lot too. It's like mine is okay, but like all the neighbors down my lane, they let the bears get into their trash every night of the summer. And every morning I watch them shoveling up the trash and putting it back into the trash can, and the bear comes the next night. Anybody else have that? So I noticed too that because we don't have an ordinance, one of the things that Wild Aware is here to do is gather concerned citizens, and might makes right in a township that isn't a town, and that doesn't have a local government, so that we can see what kind of solutions we can make. And you notice that all three experts tonight are saying, if you just clean up after yourselves and buckle down your trash responsibly, like a lot of this goes away. And so I know I'm preaching to the converted and to the choir here, but what is it? What else can we do to help mitigate, especially our neighbors who seem unaware? I actually put a sign on my after 4 years of watching him shovel up his trash every morning after the bear has gotten into it the night before. I just put a sign on that said, you know, you can, I will pay for your buckle to get you a bear aware trash can. Because if this continues, our sheriff will be forced to come and take a look, and you may be fined. The next day, he had a bear aware trash can. So where are we being nosy, and where are we being good neighbors and good citizens? These are some of the questions we want to address and answer as a group of concerned citizens, and I think who are doing the best we know how. If you are interested in being part of this, it's a part of what we do at Wild Aware called Bear Aware. And we've talked a lot with the people down in Durango, because they do have a city ordinance for that now, but they were having literally hundreds and hundreds of bear contacts and conflicts every summer. Am I saying hundreds and hundreds, or was it thousands and thousands? Lots. Lots. Question.
Yeah, I mean, given our environment, why do disposal companies not automatically pick up their trash cans?
It's a really good question.
Why do we have to call? Why do we have to wait before it's a problem to get a receptacle that?
I think because we don't have an ordinance here.
You have to pay extra for the can.
And you have to pay extra for the can. Yes, in the back. I'm sorry, what damage can what? Oh, fox. What kind of damage can fox do?
So foxes notoriously leave body parts lying around everywhere. So they're just kind of, more than anything, they're just kind of disgusting. As far as attacks on pets, a fox doesn't weigh that much. So they tend to we had a den, and I would walk my dog, and the fox would kind of come up behind my dog and kind of bark at it and follow us, but there was never really any bite to that. I have heard of a puppy being taken by a family of foxes, but in general, domestic cats are probably at a greater risk. If you have a free roaming cat, which is generally part of the ecosystem anyway, that could be a problem. But the biggest complaint I'm aware of with foxes is they leave like a duck head or a rabbit leg or like a dead snake or a mouse. And then they also have a very musky, skunky smell, so they can also be quite stinky. So that's the general, and they're very vocal, the repeated ow, 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 when they're doing that just, if that's all night, that's just not okay for most people. So that's what I know about foxes. But if anyone wants to add to that, that's it.
Foxes and raccoons, they both carry distemper, and so that's something to consider, especially if you have your dog. You want to get your dog vaccinated for distemper. It's a pretty big source of mortality for the raccoons and the foxes.
Barb Gertz is here, and she is head of our Bear Aware part of Wild Aware. And would you like to just address
trash? So on the trash can out in the lobby, I have put the prices for Mountain View and for Shirley Septic for the difference in a bear resistant trash can and the regular trash cans. And it's really not that much. I think Shirley, it's $8 a month, and Mountain View waste, it's $8 a quarter. Now, they are bear resistant, not bear proof, so they will help, but they are not a cure-all. I still suggest, trying to put as much food down to garbage disposal as possible. Freezing food, if you don't have garbage disposal, don't put your trash out, the night before. But they are they're very receptive to people calling. You just call and they'll switch your trash can out. I think Mountain View took like 2 weeks. So it's really not that big of a deal to get a bear resistant trash can. And I know with my next door neighbor who always leaves their trash for the bear to get into, I said something to him at 1 o'clock in the morning as the bear had just gotten in his trash. And he really didn't know that there was a bear resistant trash can. So sometimes don't be afraid to politely suggest to your neighbor a solution to their bear problem. So if you have that type of relationship, you might be surprised that they really truly don't know, especially if they're new up in the mountains.
So for any of you who are interested in pursuing this whole idea of getting an ordinance for bears, especially for businesses to buckle down their trash, the ones who shall remain nameless, Barb will be here for a little bit after we adjourn, which is any minute now, and we would love to have your participation. I think there's going to be strength in numbers around this particular issue. I have a question from somebody who wrote one down. If an elk or another animal is standing along the road and it's unclear if it's planning to cross or not, what's the appropriate response?
Slow down. Or stop.
Or stop.
Flash your lights, get others to slow down and stop.
Slow down and stop.
You don't know what it's going to do.
That's right. There's lore all over Evergreen, long timers, short timers, who say, roll through the 40 elk that are crossing the road, slowly honking. Anybody on that one?
How long do you wait? Once he's standing there. How long you get?
Until it, I think
We get
until it
that
moves.
question with rattlesnakes, and my answer is as long as it takes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Turn around
a
and go the
safety
other way.
issue. It's a safety issue, and people behind you will be honking at you, and that animal needs time to make a decision to get out of the way.
Well, I'm saying they're standing next to you.
Right.
Not in the road,
Right.
standing there.
Right. And I'm saying slow down or stop and watch the body language and wait for that animal to either decide to cross the road or the body language is moving away from the road. And then you can very slowly roll through. But I wouldn't just roll through with it facing the road looking like it's thinking about crossing. I think that's an unwise decision.
Is honking effective? Because it's kind of annoying.
Is honking effective for humans?
Huh? It's annoying to humans. And I wondered if it was effective.
So my experience has been that a lot of times you may have a deer or an elk that's feeding along the roadway. In the springtime, that's usually the first to green up. And so, people will kind of cruise by and you may honk, and that's a potential to spook that animal one of two directions. Could be in front of you, it could be back up the hill. So, again, I mean, you need to be going at a speed that's slow enough that if something does come out, that you can in fact stop. And if there's, if one animal's crossed and you see 3 or 4 others that are standing on the side of the road, there's a pretty good bet that they're going to cross as well. If you see 4 or 5 sheep and they're all feeding along the side of the road on the side of I-70, they may cross, but there's a good chance that they're just there to feed. But again, you need to slow down and make sure that you have a pretty decent idea of what they're planning on doing.
Yes.
Has anything been done or any progress been made as far as animal crossings on 74?
Can I address that?
Yes.
So after several meetings with Colorado Department of Transportation and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, there was a determination that there's no place in the 7 miles of Highway 74 that would lend itself to an actual physical crossing, like an underpass or an overpass. We do have these, they're called variable message signs, or the big signs that you see out right now. I think they have some effectiveness. And when we get permanent ones that they can change the message on, it keeps people's attention better. You know, talk to us after, because we've talked to CDOT about a number of things, the speed limits,
Traffic
driving,
circles.
all of the traffic. So we would love to share our conversations that we've had with them.
So to kind of piggyback on that, the governor signed an executive order talking about wildlife migration across the state. And so Parks and Wildlife, as well as CDOT, are looking at the wildlife migration issue and vehicle collisions on a statewide basis, right? And so, you know, here in the room, we think of, oh, Highway 74 and I-70 and even Highway 73 and 285, that's kind of our world, right? But in the grand scheme of things, we got hundreds of miles of other roads that may be more dangerous or have more impacts as far as migration barriers, et cetera, around the state. So one of the things that Parks and Wildlife, as well as CDOT's doing, is we are gathering additional data. And so we've all got our phones, we've got apps on our phones, and we're tracking roadkills. So if I'm driving on a back road in a neighborhood and I see a squirrel that's been hit on the road, I can mark that down as a squirrel roadkill. If I'm on 74, I can mark an elk. I travel 285 a lot, and there's tons of roadkills on Highway 285. And so we're looking at that and gathering data on, hey, where are the most, where are the spots that we have the most collisions with vehicles? Kind of on the bigger picture thing of that, we also look at if we were to install any sort of overpass or underpass, what is the likelihood of that succeeding? If any of you have driven up Highway 9 between Silverthorne and Kremling, you've seen that they've done massive amounts of work up there. They've got a lot of overpasses and underpasses. A lot of that's connecting lands that are permanently conserved in conservation easements on private property, or they're connecting public lands, so BLM or Forest Service. And so those are lands that are never going to be developed. One of the challenges we deal with here in Conifer and Evergreen is that we have private property pretty much along all of these roadways. And we actually, there's one overpass right at Schaefer's Crossing that was designed as a wildlife crossing, which is almost useless because we've got a house at the opening of the underpass and we've got open space on the south side. So we've got one ranch that's undeveloped, and on the other side, we've got developed property where, you know, animals don't feel secure using that because of the development as well as the design. It's not designed properly. And so animals, and in particular, that spot, we get a lot of animals that are hit on the top of the overpass on the highway. And so that's some of the factors that you have to look at. These overpasses cost a tremendous amount. And so, you know, if you're on a fixed budget, the priority is where do we put these overpasses or underpasses that make the most sense? We've got a lot of migrating herds around the state that are dependent on winter range or summer range that is limited. And so if we have areas that a highway divides those winter and summer habitats, that may be a perfect place to allow for additional movement back and forth in areas. And so that's something that we're looking at on a statewide basis to figure out what is the highest priorities around the state, you know, not just kind of piecemealing small local projects here or there. We want to look at the entire state and figure out what is the best for wildlife, because really, I mean, wildlife does and functions best when we have large, undeveloped, unfragmented habitats. Connecting all of those is what is most important, not necessarily connecting small pieces. It may be in certain local areas, but on a large picture, that's what's most important.
Well, you notice that the underpass crossings for the wildlife by Phileas Park,
Mhm.
do the animals use that?
Yes.
It seems like a really good option.
They use it extensively. We have the camera footage of that. And if you look at the roadkill numbers, there's fencing that goes from about Gulch all the way down to about Brookline Road, which is where Evergreen is. There's very little roadkill to that area, partly because it's very well fenced and it funnels to that, and also the bridge that you can, that big span bridge. The animals do use those areas.
It just seems like with a high speed on 74,
Mhm.
and you know, the animals just keep getting killed, they keep getting killed, and I just don't understand why they don't either reduce the speed limit or put in some traffic circles.
There are arguments,
I know.
they have studies and arguments against those things. And, you know, I'd be happy to share with you what we got with them and learned.
It's frustrating.
It's very frustrating.
It is very frustrating, and it's actually why Wildaware started. There were excessive kills on 74 a couple of years ago, so badly right before Christmas time that like a bunch of us in Haiwan were just like literally out of our minds. And so we got together and said, what can we do? And Christy started Wildaware. And since that time, and we thought an overpass, what we need is an overpass. And, you know, CPW and CDOT have been very methodical in educating us about the gray areas, because, you know, we see on social media, we see those big, beautiful overpasses. We go, yeah, we can have one of those. It's all grassy. It's great. Everybody will be happy. And there are literally 100 reasons why it wouldn't work for this particular area. But what will work is something that Mary had already said, and that is we have to slow down.
That's it.
That I've noticed over the last 18 months that our speed limits are a suggestion in our neighborhoods now. I am traveling home late at night because I'm working down in Denver in the evenings. I'm coming home usually between 11:30 and 1 o'clock in the morning. And 5 nights in a row, if I had been going faster than 42 miles an hour, I would have hit an elk or a deer every night. And it was only because I was going so much slower than the speed limit that I was able to take evasive action. So what does all that mean? We have to slow down. People are furious at me because I'm driving the speed limit, and they're honking and driving me off the road because I'm driving the speed limit. And I'm like, I'm just going to keep driving the speed limit. Slow down at night. Absolutely. Scan the roadsides. I don't even play music in my car anymore because when I'm driving at night, that's all I'm doing. Are there any final questions for our illustrious panel? Yes, ma'am. Oh, hold on, we've got 2 questions. One here and then down. That's all right.
So the question for Mary Ann, she mentioned earlier about that when she first went to Roxborough and there was an incident with mountain lions, she said you did all the right things. We have a lot of mountain lions that are hiking around. What is the best thing to do with a mountain lion comes? So he did all the wrong things.
He did all wrong.
So I mentioned it earlier, you do want to, if it's a sudden, you come around the corner, there's the mountain lion, you want to stop, assess the situation. If you can back away, not running away, but back away with your arms up, being very forceful, you know, making sure you don't come across as prey. That's what you want to do, is back out of the situation and come off as the alpha, not prey. We had a woman who kept a mountain lion away from her for 27 minutes at Deer Creek Canyon Park last summer by following our directions. She had a mountain bike with her and she used the mountain bike to keep the mountain lion away from her. She yelled at it. She'd even fallen and hurt her knee, and she just kept yelling and standing her ground. And that is what I think kept her from making contact with that, or the mountain lion making contact with her. So that's the advice. And again, we had a trail runner at Apex. There was a mountain lion on a carcass, and the trail runner said, well, I just decided to run past it. And I'm like, what? And he said, and you know, the mountain lion didn't move off the carcass. And I'm thinking, right. And you're lucky it didn't come after you. And so these are decisions you can make when you see a mountain lion. Do not attempt to run past it. Do not attempt to run toward it. Do not try to get closer to it. You need to get out of that situation. You need to do it maintaining visual of the lion and backing out.
Does the same thing go for a bear on the trail?
Yes, again, if you have the opportunity to back out and not have any interaction at all, that's your best thing you want to do. But sometimes bears will bluff charge, you know, because you got too close. And so that's just something that, again, make yourself look big. Do not turn and run away. You want to be, if you have anything to enhance your stature, a backpack, a hiking pole, anything like that. People have used water bottles and swung them around. A mountain bike is great for creating a zone of safety. So those are all tips for that situation.
Great questions.
So to add on to that, if you do actually end up getting attacked, either by a bear or a mountain lion, the mountain lion, right, if it attacks you, for the most part, it's going to be a predatory attack. It's going to be offensive. So you want to fight back, okay? That mountain lion's trying to kill you. Black bears in particular, very seldom are they going to actually make contact with you. But if they do, again, you're going to want to fight back and try and protect yourself. Animals like deer, elk, and moose, your best option is either to get away, you know, right? You're not going to be able to fight a moose. You're going to want to basically, you know, try and get away from that situation. That's going to be a defensive attack. It's trying to basically tell you that you're too close and that you need to get back. And so, you know, if you're on the ground, if you can create any sort of distance, most of the time with those types of attacks, there's a sudden attack and then there's withdrawal. So at that point, if you can create that space, that's where you're going to be best.
Very helpful and very informative. I was just wondering if folks like yourselves go to the schools, the elementary schools, and educate the kids.
Diagnose that too. We would love to. We just need more people. And since we started in 2019, we've had a pandemic. We haven't been able to have any events. So we haven't been able to really recruit some volunteers and maybe get some donations from sponsors. So we would love to. We actually have some curriculum put together, and we'd really love to talk to someone about getting into the school. So if that's an idea you have, please tell me.
You had a question down here?
I wondered what education about the wildlife down at the lake was going on, because it seems that Estes Park, it's very prevalent there. And when, as far as the rut and the calving season, and for years I didn't see any signs of
Up here?
there. But I've seen so many things down there that scared me, that
What, at the lake?
stomach and nuts, and it involves children too with their parents. So it doesn't seem that everybody's aware of what to do.
Yeah, so Vicki and I, and also Evergreen Audubon, put together a program called Wildlife Watch. And we go to the lake on the weekends during calving and during rut. And for obvious reasons, during calving, I stood there and watched person after person get chased by the elk, the cow elk that are right off the path with their dogs and this sort of thing. And of course during the rut. So what we're doing is we're recruiting people, we're training them, bringing them out there to you. And now we've got another couple of weekends and then we're done. We just need more people, but we work with Audubon because we bring out some of their educational materials and we talk to people kind of out on the boardwalk or in the area. So we've done a lot of good in reaching out to people that can't need more volunteers to be able to do it.
And what we can't do is, we're not authorities, right? So we don't wear a badge, and we don't have a mandate to say, you know, stop walking across the path of that elk. You know, we can suggest that they might want to go another way, but we're really there for education purposes. Any last questions before we adjourn for the evening? We have lots and lots of materials out in the lobby. We'd love you to take advantage of them. Please let us know what your interests are in joining Wild Aware. Education, awareness raising, bear aware, looking to go to the town fathers, you know, I don't know, that murky bunch, but to actually get some to take some action, so that the town can actually take some action, especially with the businesses. We have also some august some people sitting in the audience. So Jason Clay is also with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and so is Mark. Okay. And then we also have Robin here. Could you stand up and just wave to everybody from the Wildlife Federation, Colorado Wildlife Federation?
I've been an Evergreen resident for almost 40 years. I've probably seen everything that's been described here. And I'm retired from Parks and Wildlife, the fishery biologist. So we're looking to possibly work out some things with
Wildlife. Thank you. Thanks so much.
I live on the Highland Golf Course. And I could probably see every type of elk activity that's possible to see. But it's, you know, it's one of the benefits of living here, but also it's what I call a responsibility to live with the wild. There are things that.
Thank you very much for saying that, Robin. That is our mandate. You know, we're here to live in harmony with the wildlife that was here for millennia. So if it means we have to wait for 20 minutes while 60 elk cross the road, that's what it means. And that's part of living in Evergreen, I think. We have some sponsors that I'd like to mention. Daniel Rakes, would you just wave your hand? Daniel is a brilliant wildlife photographer and has agreed to allow us to use his photography for our promotional purposes. So thank you very much. We also are sponsors at Berkshire Hathaway. Thank you for doing all our printing, Doug. We really appreciate it. And also your husband, where did he go?
Yeah, the little girl had to go to bed.
That's your bedtime. Thank you very much, Benjamin Moore, also. Yeah. Any other sponsors?
I think so. Nick Kostecki with Keller Williams.
That's what I meant. Did I say Benjamin Moore? I did, didn't I? That's past my bedtime too. It's Nick Kostecki, and he's with Keller Williams Realty.
We do want to thank the Canyon Courier also